Imagine a soldier, ordinary in every way, standing against corruption, hunger, and global powers, and rising to become the fearless voice of an entire continent. This is the story of Ibrahim Traoré, a man whose courage saved thousands and inspired millions. Before we dive in, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a story that changes the way you see the world. And now, witness the incredible journey of Africa's fearless leader. The story begins not with a roar, but with a whisper. In the dust-blown streets of Ouagadougou, a young soldier walked alone. His boots left faint marks on the cracked pavement, each step echoing a rhythm of silent determination. This was Ibrahim Traoré, unknown, untested, yet carrying a weight that would one day shake a continent. At 25, he was still learning the language of power, the subtle currents that ran beneath the surface of politics and military life. Yet already, the pulse of injustice was clear to him. The hunger in the villages, the overworked soldiers, the corruption that had poisoned his homeland for decades. He watched generals count profits while mothers buried children, and he understood something most men in power could not. Dignity could not be borrowed. It had to be seized. The shadow of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary martyr, hung over the nation like a ghost. Sankara had dreamed of a free Africa, unbowed by foreign powers, yet he had paid the ultimate price. His words, etched in murals and whispered in back alleys, were not forgotten. And now, decades later, the same foreign forces, IMF officials, multinational corporations and global powers, watched Burkina Faso closely, wary of another insurgent spirit rising from its soil. In Washington, whispers of this young soldier reached ears that were accustomed to ignoring Africa. Donald Trump, in private briefings, was informed of the subtle but growing force in Ouagadougou. European capitals, too, monitored him, sending intelligence reports back to Paris, London, and Berlin. If Traoré succeeds, this could spark a domino effect across the continent, analysts warned. A nation that rejects control is a threat to all who profit from dependency. But Traoré did not know this. He was not yet a symbol. He was simply a man listening to the heartbeat of his country, feeling the tremors of its pain, and slowly understanding that silence would only deepen the suffering. Life in the barracks was brutal. Orders came down from distant generals whose decisions were colored by foreign influence. Supplies were scarce. Training was relentless, but for what? Soldiers were expected to enforce rules they did not understand, protect leaders they could not respect, and ignore the misery around them. Each day, Traoré observed the quiet betrayals of loyalty. Comrades accepting bribes, turning blind eyes, rationalizing cruelty. Yet he did not join them. He spent nights wandering the streets, seeing mothers dragging their children to hospitals they could never afford, farmers lying ill in the fields, markets filled with the hollow eyes of the desperate. And it was in those nights, under the weight of a silent sky, that the seed of a revolution began to grow in his chest. Not all battles are fought with guns. Some are fought with courage, with choices, with the simple act of refusing to turn away. The first whispers of his defiance came quietly. A mismanaged order corrected without permission. A stolen moment spent helping civilians rather than obeying a reckless command. No one noticed at first, not even his commanding officers. But small acts accumulate. They are remembered by those who suffer and feared by those in power. By the time he reached his mid-20s, Traoré had witnessed enough betrayal to fill libraries of regret. Generals sold contracts to foreign corporations. Ministers pocketed aid meant for the people. And behind every polite international handshake, foreign leaders calculated their leverage, quietly fearful of what a man like Traoré could inspire. It was not yet open rebellion. It was not yet a headline. But it was growing, a quiet, unstoppable force that drew attention across the world. Intelligence briefings in Washington labeled him a wild card, in Paris a threat to stability, and in London a man to watch. They did not yet understand him, but the fear was real. Meanwhile, inside Burkina Faso, the nation writhed under poverty and neglect. Children starved, while politicians dined on imported luxury. Doctors were scarce. Hospitals were overcrowded and underfunded. Each failure of the system was a reminder that change would not come from above. It would have to rise from the ground, from someone willing to risk everything to make it happen, and that someone was Traoré. He began to see patterns, networks of corruption, and the hidden hand of foreign influence. He spoke quietly to a few trusted soldiers, sharing observations, planting the seeds of loyalty. They were few, but the few were enough. They watched him with curiosity, with hope, with the same recognition of courage that others could not yet name. Traoré's resolve hardened when a major scandal erupted. A shipment of vital medical supplies was diverted, leaving hundreds to suffer or die. The generals claimed it was an accident. The people knew better. Traoré could not ignore it. For him, a nation's dignity was worth more than obedience. By the end of Act 1, a storm was gathering. Traoré was no longer just a soldier. He was a man standing on the threshold of history, facing enemies both within and far beyond his borders. His people did not yet know him as a leader. The world did not yet know him as a threat. But whispers in capitals, from Trump's advisors to European analysts, warned that Africa's next great force was rising, unstoppable and fearless. And in the silence before that storm, Traoré made a choice. He would not be silent. What he chose next, the narration teases, would echo across Africa and strike fear in the hearts of the world's most powerful leaders. The quiet defiance that had begun in the shadows of Ouagadougou now took root, like fire creeping through dry grass. Traoré moved carefully. Every act of compassion, every moment he helped civilians, every mismanaged order he corrected without permission, was noted, both by his loyal soldiers and by those who feared him. Word of his deeds traveled fast through the streets, carried in whispers from village to village. Farmers spoke of a soldier who refused to look away. Children called his name in hope, but his enemies were not idle. The generals, once complacent, began to sense a shift in loyalty. Their spies reported murmurs among troops, small gatherings after drills, hushed debates over fairness, questions about obedience to a corrupt system. They could not understand it. The young soldier, they thought, was insignificant. Yet his growing influence threatened everything they had built. The foreign powers watching from afar were more perceptive. In Washington, Trump's advisors flagged Traoré as a potential disruptor. Across Europe, intelligence analysts whispered of a new African figure whose leadership could inspire widespread resistance. They studied his moves, calculated the ripple effects of his actions, and feared what they could not control. A man unbound by protocol, motivated not by wealth, but by justice. Inside Burkina Faso, the stakes rose daily. The people's suffering intensified. Hospitals overflowed with children suffering from preventable illnesses. Farmers could not sell crops because foreign-controlled markets had restricted trade. Hunger became a national pulse, a rhythm of despair echoing across villages. Each tragedy strengthened Traoré's resolve. Inaction was no longer an option. He began to organize quietly. Small units of loyal soldiers and civilians started communicating, planning interventions that would aid the people without attracting immediate retaliation. They repaired broken wells, distributed food, and sneaked medical supplies to villages the government had abandoned. Traoré became a ghost in his own country, everywhere yet invisible, moving through the cracks of bureaucracy to deliver hope. The generals, frustrated by the inexplicable loyalty forming around him, tried to act. They issued orders that Traoré ignored. They sent trusted officers to arrest him. He evaded them. They spread propaganda painting him as reckless, a threat to stability. Yet with every attack, every smear, the people grew more certain of him. His legend was not built in headlines, but in the hearts of those he saved. Foreign powers, meanwhile, adjusted their strategy. Trump and European leaders debated their next move. Sanctions? Threats? Subtle interventions? They feared that any heavy-handed action would backfire. Burkina Faso was small, but the symbolism of its defiance was massive. A successful uprising here could inspire the entire continent, shaking centuries of influence and control. Traoré noticed these subtle pressures. He observed the foreign-backed generals, the disguised threats, the whispers of global leaders afraid of his influence. He did not falter. Instead, he learned to exploit their expectations, moving boldly where they assumed he would hesitate, turning fear into a tool of strategy. The people's unrest reached a boiling point. In towns and villages, protests began. Not violent uprisings, but waves of collective refusal. Workers refused orders that benefited corrupt officials. Students boycotted institutions complicit in oppression, and farmers withheld taxes that never reached the people. Traoré's influence was evident everywhere, yet he remained a symbol rather than a dictator, an embodiment of courage, visible through action rather than rhetoric. The generals panicked, turned to sabotage. Hospitals were starved of supplies. Food shipments vanished. Power grids faltered mysteriously. The nation teetered on collapse, and some soldiers began to question their allegiance. Yet Traoré continued to move forward, orchestrating small victories that restored hope and proved resilience. One defining moment came when a convoy of critical medical supplies was intercepted by corrupt officials. Traoré, leading a small trusted unit, orchestrated a daring nighttime recovery. Under moonlight, they navigated sand-swept roads, evading patrols, and delivered the supplies to a rural hospital on the brink of collapse. Patients who would have died that night were saved, their stories whispered from village to village. Across the globe, intelligence analysts watched, and fear grew. This was no longer a soldier's rebellion. It was a movement. Even the media, tightly controlled by foreign powers, could not ignore him. Small leaks, anonymous reports, and eyewitness accounts portrayed him as a man unafraid to act when others hid behind protocol. Headlines in Europe began to read cautiously. Young African soldier challenges the system, or Burkina Faso's rising star sparks concern abroad. Trump's advisors noted each mention, aware that the global narrative was shifting in real time. Within the army, loyalty solidified. Soldiers saw not a commander but a leader who risked everything for the people. The contrast between Traoré and the self-serving generals could not have been more stark. Ordinary citizens, emboldened by his example, began organizing local initiatives. Clinics rebuilt, water wells repaired, crops distributed fairly. Traoré's shadow stretched across the nation. The world begins to take notice not just of his acts, but of what they represent. The fear of Trump and other global leaders is palpable. Conferences, backroom meetings, and intelligence reports focus entirely on this one figure. Analysts worry that his success could ignite a wave of defiance across Africa, a realization that no power is absolute, no control guaranteed. And within Burkina Faso, Traoré stands at the center of it all, calm and resolute. The stage is set, the conspirators are gathering their strength, the people are ready to rise, and the world is watching, trembling at the possibility of an African leader who refuses to be tamed. The die is cast. The shadows of betrayal grow longer, but so does the fire of hope. The question now is not if he will act, but how far he will go, and how the world will respond. The air was thick with anticipation, yet no one could see the storm gathering in the streets of Ouagadougou. Traoré moved like a shadow, aware that every glance could be a report to the generals. Every whispered word could carry betrayal. The people, sensing a quiet force guiding them, began to rally without knowing the man who inspired them. Farmers repaired their own roads. Students gathered in secret to organize. Nurses improvised clinics in abandoned buildings. Each small act of defiance was a spark, and the flame spread faster than the generals anticipated. The conspirators were growing desperate. The minister, the doctor, the politician, once confident in their invisible power, now felt the cracks beneath their feet. They whispered threats in hushed corridors, attempting to intimidate soldiers into submission. They spread rumors of Traoré's supposed recklessness, painting him as a danger to national security. Each lie was calculated to fracture the loyalty growing among the troops, yet it only hardened Traoré's supporters. At the same time, the world's gaze intensified. Intelligence networks tracked every movement, every clandestine meeting. Trump, in private briefings, leaned forward as advisors outlined the potential fallout. If Traoré succeeded, neighboring nations could follow, shaking the delicate control long maintained by global powers. Analysts in Europe and America called him a force of unpredictability, a wildcard who was rewriting the rules of influence in Africa. Traoré knew their fear, yet he did not let it dictate his actions. Instead, he used it as leverage. By continuing to operate quietly, By making visible successes in the villages and hidden victories in the army, he created a tension that the conspirators could not diffuse. They were forced to act in the open, revealing their corruption while he remained untouchable, moving with precision and purpose. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the dusty horizon, a convoy carrying essential medical supplies was intercepted. Soldiers loyal to the corrupt generals blocked the route, their weapons a threat to the villagers who had gathered to receive aid. Traoré, anticipating such a move, had prepared a small team. Under the cover of twilight, they navigated through the outskirts of the city, using paths known only to locals, and bypassed the blockade entirely. When they arrived at the clinic, the villagers were waiting. Relief washed over the faces of children too weak to speak, mothers holding their babies as if afraid to breathe, elders clutching frail hands. Traoré distributed supplies with the same careful precision he had learned in the barracks, yet with a humanity the generals could never grasp. Cameras hidden by sympathetic journalists captured the scene, and soon the images circulated across Africa, fueling hope and inspiring action far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. The generals escalated. Hospitals were sabotaged, power lines cut, trucks carrying food disappeared into thin air. It was a silent war waged through infrastructure, a test of endurance against the nation itself. Soldiers whispered doubts. Some defected quietly, joining the ranks that supported Traoré. Others, afraid of the consequences, remained in the shadows, neither fully loyal nor openly opposed. The nation held its breath. Amid the chaos, Traoré took a calculated risk. He addressed the people directly, though not with speeches. He moved among them, carrying supplies, assisting doctors, visiting villages. His presence alone conveyed defiance. News of his actions spread quickly. Crowds swelled in the squares, calling his name, painting murals, leaving flowers and notes of thanks outside makeshift clinics. Every act of sabotage the conspirators attempted backfired, exposing their desperation. Globally, the fear intensified. Reports reached Washington and European capitals showing that Traoré was not only surviving the internal conspiracies, but thriving despite them. Analysts warned of a ripple effect, a wave of African nations emboldened to reject exploitation and corruption. Discussions that once centered on trade and influence now shifted to contingency plans for an entire continent inspired by one man. Within Burkina Faso, the tension reached its peak. A coordinated attempt to destroy one of the main hospitals was narrowly averted. The conspirators had underestimated Traoré's foresight. He had anticipated their moves, placing loyal engineers and medics strategically to prevent disaster. When the smoke cleared and the building remained intact, the population erupted in a quiet, triumphant roar. It was in these moments that the nation truly began to see him not just as a soldier, but as a beacon. His courage, his careful strategy, and his refusal to bend under pressure revealed a new kind of leadership, one that did not rely on titles or wealth, but on the unwavering commitment to protect and uplift his people. Even the general's closest allies began to waver. They watched as their carefully orchestrated campaigns failed, as public opinion shifted decisively toward Traoré. Their whispers of control became screams of panic. In private meetings, they argued desperately over how to regain power, yet every proposal was undermined by the undeniable reality. Traoré had become unstoppable. Across the continent, the news spread. Citizens in neighboring countries followed the events with bated breath. Young leaders, students, and activists began to see what was possible. They recognized a man willing to stand firm against both domestic corruption and the scrutiny of global powers. Even those far removed from Burkina Faso felt the stirrings of courage in their own hearts, inspired by a soldier who refused to remain silent. By the end of this chapter in his journey, Traoré had transformed from a man acting quietly in the shadows to a figure whose influence reached every corner of his country and whose reputation stirred unease across the world. Foreign leaders, from Trump's inner circle to European intelligence agencies, watched carefully, calculating risks, aware that history was being rewritten in real time. The nation waited. The conspirators prepared for their next move, and Ibrahim Traoré, calm but resolute, understood the stakes more clearly than anyone. Failure was unacceptable, and victory required courage beyond fear. strategy beyond instinct, and the unwavering trust of a people who had begun to believe in him. The world watches, hearts racing, waiting to see who will prevail in a country where every act, every choice now carries the weight of history itself. The city held its breath as the moment arrived. Ouagadougou's streets, usually a maze of dust and chatter, were eerily still. News had spread that something monumental was about to happen. Crowds gathered in squares, clinics, and hospitals, unsure what to expect, yet certain that change was near. Every whisper carried the weight of anticipation. Every glance toward the horizon spoke of hope, of fear, of the unknown. Traoré moved with purpose. He had spent months quietly preparing for this day, mapping the conspirators' weaknesses, coordinating loyal soldiers and civilians, ensuring that the population was ready to witness, to support, to participate in history. What the generals had called impossible, he intended to make inevitable. Inside the main hospital, preparations were underway. Patients, many of whom had been waiting weeks for treatment, were connected to dialysis machines meticulously repaired and operated by local engineers. Nurses moved with precision, their hands guided by both experience and determination. Traoré walked among them, his military uniform and red beret unmistakable, not as a figurehead, but as a man sharing their burdens, bearing their pain. The conspirators had not given up. The minister and the politician, emboldened by desperation, attempted to seize control. Soldiers loyal to them blocked entrances, cut communications, and tried to intimidate the staff. Yet Traoré anticipated each move. His loyalists held strategic positions, guiding patients safely, securing supplies, and ensuring the flow of the operation remained uninterrupted. The tension was palpable. Cameras captured every moment, transmitting images across Africa and the world. International observers, Trump's advisors, European officials, global media, watched nervously. This was not merely a hospital unveiling. It was a declaration of defiance, a demonstration that a nation could reclaim its sovereignty and dignity against all odds. Then the first act of confrontation began. A squad of generals' loyalists entered the main hall, intending to shut down the machines. Traoré met them calmly. He did not raise a weapon. He did not yell. Instead, he stepped forward, guiding patients out of immediate danger, demonstrating courage that transcended threat. His presence alone disarmed many. Others hesitated, unsure whether to obey the conspirators or heed the man who had become a symbol of justice. Smoke flared from a minor sabotage attempt. Alarms rang, chaos surged. But Traoré remained steady. He coordinated, lifted stretchers, reassured nurses, and moved patients to safety. His hands, steady yet strong, carried the fragile hope of hundreds of lives. The world watched in awe as one man, a soldier, orchestrated an entire nation's defiance with dignity and precision. The confrontation escalated. The conspirators, seeing their control crumble, attempted more aggressive moves, threats, intimidation, even sabotage of the electrical grid. Traoré anticipated each action. Every move they made exposed their desperation. Every failed attempt reinforced the loyalty of those around him. The people's faith in his leadership became a tangible force, a shield protecting the vulnerable and a hammer striking the corrupt. Outside, crowds surged. Citizens lined the streets, watching as the hospital became the stage for an extraordinary spectacle. Mothers held children, young men and women raised banners, the air thick with chants of hope and defiance. The energy was palpable, a living testament to the transformation Traoré had inspired. For the global audience, the impact was seismic. Analysts scrambled to explain what was happening. Headlines appeared in Europe and America. Burkina Faso defies conspirators, delivers mass health care. Young African leader stuns the world. Trump and other world leaders watched closely, their fear of the ripple effect intensifying. A small nation, they realized, had achieved what multinationals and political elites had long deemed impossible. Inside the hospital, the climax of the confrontation unfolded quietly, yet powerfully. The conspirators, exposed and outmaneuvered, were removed from positions of influence. Soldiers who had once doubted, witnessing Traoré's unwavering courage, now pledged loyalty. Patients received their treatment uninterrupted. Engineers, nurses, and citizens who had supported the effort celebrated silently, aware that they had been part of a historic turning point. The chaos subsided. The smoke cleared. The machines hummed steadily, life flowing through the veins of the nation. Traoré, standing amidst the wards, looked at the faces of those he had saved. Mothers smiled, children laughed, elders wept tears of relief. In that moment, he was neither soldier nor politician, but a living emblem of hope. The world recognized it. Media coverage spread like wildfire. Stories circulated of a man who had defied corruption, betrayal, and global pressure to safeguard his people. Political analysts debated the implications. Diplomats called meetings. Corporations recalculated their influence. For the first time in decades, one nation's triumph over internal and external threats became a beacon for all of Africa. Traoré did not claim victory in speeches. His triumph was measured in the lives saved, the systems strengthened, and the people empowered. The hospitals continued to operate, the dialysis machines worked tirelessly, and the nation's collective confidence swelled. What had begun as a soldier's quiet rebellion had become a nationwide movement, unstoppable and inspiring. As night fell over Ouagadougou, the city glowed, not from streetlights, but from the fire ignited in the hearts of its people. The streets were alive with chants, banners, and the energy of a nation that had seen its darkest moments and emerged stronger. Traoré stood quietly on the steps of the hospital. His eyes scanned the city, knowing the world had witnessed something extraordinary. The conspirators were defeated, yet the lesson extended beyond borders. Courage, integrity, and dedication to the people could topple entrenched power. And as cameras captured this historic scene, one undeniable truth emerged. Ibrahim Traoré had become Africa's fearless voice, and the world would never forget it. The dawn rose over Ouagadougou, painting the city in soft gold and amber, a stark contrast to the darkness that had shrouded it for so long. The streets, once silent with fear and uncertainty, now buzzed with quiet triumph. The people emerged from their homes, stepping into a reality they had only dared to imagine. Burkina Faso had survived, and in surviving, it had begun to reclaim its soul. Ibrahim Traoré walked among them. No grand speeches, no parades. His uniform and red beret were symbols, but his actions spoke louder than any title. Children ran alongside him, their laughter a balm to the wounds of months spent in despair. Mothers offered blessings and words of gratitude. Farmers showed him the first healthy crops of the season, proof that life, even after struggle, could flourish. The hospitals, once on the brink of collapse, now functioned with unprecedented efficiency. Dialysis machines hummed steadily, treating patients who had previously been abandoned by the system. Engineers and nurses worked tirelessly, their spirits buoyed by Traoré's unwavering presence. For the first time in decades, health, hope, and dignity coexisted in a nation long denied them. News of Burkina Faso's miracle spread across borders. African nations watched closely, many inspired to take steps of their own. Young leaders in neighboring countries studied the methods Traoré had employed. Careful planning, strategic alliances, and relentless focus on the people's needs. Across the continent, whispers of change turned into conversations, and conversations began to fuel movements. World leaders, including Trump and his advisors, had no choice but to acknowledge the reality. Their intelligence networks reported a simple truth. A man from a small West African nation had defied corruption, manipulated chaos into order, and emerged victorious. For the first time, power brokers realized that the old systems of influence could not contain a leader fueled by conviction and moral courage. The fear that had simmered in secret now became a matter of public record. In Europe and America, political analysts debated the implications. Editorials ran across newspapers and online outlets, calling Traoré the man who changed the rules and a symbol of Africa's awakening. His defiance of both internal corruption and external pressure became a case study in leadership, resilience, and the untapped power of the people. Inside Burkina Faso, the impact was immediate and tangible. Citizens began to reclaim spaces that had been dominated by fear. Markets thrived, schools reopened with renewed attendance, and communities rebuilt infrastructure previously sabotaged by corrupt officials. Traoré had done more than protect lives. He had restored the possibility of prosperity and dignity. Yet his influence was not limited to infrastructure or health systems. It resonated in hearts and minds. People began to speak differently, to think differently. The young and old alike recognized the power of collective action, the courage it required, and the potential each individual held to change the course of history. Traoré's journey from soldier to leader had become a blueprint for resistance, a story repeated in whispers, speeches, and now even academic discourse. The conspirators who had once controlled the nation were left exposed. Their schemes had failed not only because of Traoré's strategy, but because the people had chosen him over them. Loyalists who had once hesitated found purpose and conviction, joining efforts to rebuild and secure the nation's future. Justice, while measured and careful, began to reclaim spaces long dominated by deceit. For Traoré, the victory was both personal and collective. The weight of responsibility was immense, yet he bore it with quiet determination. His soldiers, his allies, and the people looked to him not merely as a commander, but as a living embodiment of resilience. Every life saved, every patient who recovered, and every citizen inspired reaffirmed the idea that leadership was measured not by power held, but by lives protected and hope restored. The global stage watched as Burkina Faso transformed from a nation in despair to one of inspiration. Leaders once fearful now recognized the limits of their control. Multinational corporations adjusted policies, diplomats recalculated influence, and analysts studied the ripple effects Traoré had created. A single man had challenged centuries of entrenched power and emerged not just unscathed, but celebrated. Across Africa, the change was more subtle, yet no less profound. Young leaders, motivated by Traoré's example, began organizing initiatives to reclaim their own nation's dignity. Students, farmers, and activists drew courage from a single narrative: that one determined individual, grounded in principle and connected to the people, could defy overwhelming odds. Burkina Faso's success became a lens through which all African nations reconsidered the balance of power and the potential for self-determination. As the sun rose higher, Traoré stood on the steps of the hospital, watching the people go about their day. He did not need applause or recognition. Their smiles, their laughter, and the hum of life were reward enough. Yet the symbolism of the moment was undeniable. A nation, once on the brink, had been restored by courage, vision, and relentless dedication. He reflected on the journey, the betrayals, the sabotage, the sleepless nights, and the constant threat from those who had feared him most. The path had been treacherous, but each challenge had honed his resolve. Now he was more than a soldier, more than a leader. He was a voice that would echo for generations, a symbol that courage in the face of oppression could reshape not only a nation, but an entire continent. And as the world watched, the question lingered in the minds of every citizen, analyst, and observer: is this the moment Africa truly broke its chains? The answer, though still unfolding, was written in the lives saved, in the dignity restored, and in the hope ignited across the nation. Ibrahim Traoré had become a fearless voice for Africa, not through conquest or violence, but through unwavering courage, strategic brilliance, and a profound commitment to the people he served. The story would continue, carried in whispers, in speeches, and in the quiet acts of thousands inspired by one man who refused to turn away. But for this moment, Burkina Faso stood as proof that leadership rooted in humanity and vision could change the course of history.